Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Kelly Lendsay here, Chief Transformation Officer at Luminary. I'm speaking to you today from Treaty 6 in the Métis homeland of Saskatchewan. And we got a great subject topic here today. It's about engaging the academic and the Indigenous business community to accelerate Canada's innovation agenda. Joining me today, I've got Terri Lynn Morrison, our Executive Director at Luminary. We've got Dr. Tasha Brooks, who is our Senior Research Lead at Luminary and Assistant Professor at Royal Roads. We got Keith Willoughby, a former colleague of mine. He's the Dean of Edwards Business School at the University of Saskatchewan. Like I said, a former colleague, friend that goes back to the 90s. Candice Loring is with Genome BC, and she's the Indigenous Relations and Initiatives Director at Genome BC. We've known each other a long time through MyTax and other associations. And George Lafond, a former tribal chief, former treaty commissioner in Saskatchewan, professional director, and an aspiring masters swimmer. So there's our panel for today. So let me just set the stage on this topic on innovation. We all know that the OECD, the Organization for Economic Development Corporation, says that innovation drives economic advancement and well-being. But when you look at sort of Canada's report card, the Conference Board gives us a C- on innovation. If you look at the Global Innovation Index, Canada ranks 15th, or maybe it's 17th. We've lost positioning. And so it really sort of begs the question, innovation is at the doorstep, and how do we embrace it? And just last night and the night before, there's actually advertisements both on CBC and CTV television promoting innovation. So I think in this Trump era, innovation is affecting everything. It's affecting trade policy. It's affecting AI, is affecting the types of training we look at. It's affecting product development, systems. It's impacting jobs and so on. So I think innovation, AI is at the doorstep, and that's what we're going to explore today. And these panels are going to be able to reflect and share with you where there's opportunities to really expand collaborations between the Indigenous business community and the academic community, and especially with our business schools, to look at how to expand curriculum, student engagement, case studies, that whole side of the equation. How to foster research partnerships that look at Indigenous economic priorities that really create tangible economic well-being impacts. And the third objective is really, what are some new and interesting action ideas and strategies? And you folks that are participating, you might have some to share when we get through the panel about how we can accelerate Indigenous innovation. So that's really the overall objectives for today and the subject matter. And I think what all of these folks have in common is that they were in Phoenix, Arizona last January. We brought together 45 leaders from deans, Indigenous academics, Indigenous businesses, NGOs, with our friend Dr. Manley Begay at Northern Arizona University. And we did a huddle around this topic of innovation. So all of these folks are from there. So they're going to bring some of their thoughts and perspectives from that event. They're going to be able to share with you where we're at and what's really needed. And so I'm going to ask George to sort of lead off by, George, you've been, looking at this agenda a long time. We've been talking about it, and it's now arrived at the doorstep. Your thoughts and perspectives on innovation. Where do we go from here to advance Indigenous innovation agenda and this ecosystem with all the players and partners?
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for bringing us all together to have this very important and timely discussion. Probably even more timely because the fact what's happening to the south of the border with us and the economy that we had integrated with the Americas, and basically it exposed really what Canada had been sleepwalking for quite some time, which is we were talking a lot about innovation for quite some time. I was around when we looked at the Porter Report in the 80s. And in 1988, we fought for the free trade with America. And we recognized that we were, as a country, we were relying fairly heavily on our primary industries like fishery, timber, mining, oil and gas. And we weren't really innovating much. We were just simply taking it out of the ground and putting it into the economy and selling it to the world. then in the mid 90s, we began to recognize that we actually had to have a couple of things in our innovation agenda, which is understanding digital literacy and, of course, intellectual property. If you really want to Google Jim Bazzilli, he's a real expert on intellectual property. And so, we moved into a world of clean tech in the late 1990s and through the 2000s. And we began to see that we were a small country when it came to innovation. And we really had to catch up. And, governments tried very hard to invest in right areas. And we got away from the primary industries. We also got to see that inside those primary industries, Indigenous people were participating. And I think you, Kelly, you did a great study on mining. The mining sector was probably the fastest and the quickest that took up the Indigenous inclusion. But most often at a low level, employment, procurement. We're now talking about in today's world, how are the equity partners inside the economy? And so where we're at right now with innovation is that, and you mentioned one of the most significant pulls in the economy is the AI, the emergence of AI. That is a significant pull in all of the sectors. And so where Indigenous people actually have to get in behind and push, obviously, is making sure that our young people have a literacy skill, an understanding of intellectual property, and I think in many ways too, and I'll stop here, that a lot of our country really, as a country, it's not only Indigenous people, but we really lack the entrepreneurial skill. We were quite dependent on government subsidies, government grants, government employment. Saskatchewan, for example, Crown corporations. And as I said, we tended to sort of, everything was great, things were moving along, and all of a sudden we got woken up. And we got to realize that an entrepreneurial skill is really what Canada really now needs to have, which is understanding our risk, understanding the rewards, and understanding whatever sector they're in, that they're going to have to scale up in many ways to compete in the innovation agenda. But if you don't have those three essential components to any educational system, digital literacy, intellectual property, and having this entrepreneurial skill of not being driven to succeed, but also not afraid to fail. And I think when you take a look at some of the major industries that we have, and we've seen in the last number of years, there has been failures, but it's the entrepreneur that basically picks up the pieces and said, okay, where did we make a mistake and how can we move forward? And I think Indigenous people have to begin to sort of see that. We've got a very strong collective out there. You're going to see a lot of economic development companies attached to First Nation communities with their significant trust funds, with the significant resources that they receive from oil and gas or forestry or mining, but very risk adverse. A lot of time meeting and making sure that they're making the right investments. And unfortunately, a lot of corporations that are inside the market economy, time is of the essence. So having that proper fit with Indigenous communities really takes a long time of engagement. And at times, companies just don't have that patience and move on. So I'll leave it at that. I think the innovation agenda is probably moving very quick. And what is leading that, of course, is AI. And it's just not only Indigenous communities are trying to catch up and understand it. I mean, the whole country is. We haven't even got any legislation that is going to guidepost us on where we're going to go.
Yeah. George, it's the players. You mentioned entrepreneurs, economic development corporations. Tasha Brooks has got 1 foot in the community, 1 foot in the economic world, 1 foot in academia. And Tasha, we've talked about this ecosystem. And going back to 2021, when we brought together 150 Luminary charter partners, they basically said there is an innovation engagement gap. Players aren't there in the ecosystem. We've got 75,000 to 100,000 entrepreneurs, depending on which study you look at. We've got Indigenous economic development corporations that are managed and run by their communities. And But when you talk to business schools and the academic community, they've been engaged in areas of law and health, but not so much in economic innovation. And so I think that's really, Tasha, where the thrust needs to go is the ecosystem, the importance of bridging the Indigenous economy and business community with the academic community to harness innovation. Your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I think when we're talking about this innovation ecosystem, we have to break it down. There's a number of actors and factors involved in these various domains. So I'd invite everybody to think about what kind of key role that they play. And yes, you mentioned Kelly. I am a counselor for my nation. So that part of me is really engaged in thinking about our future and building our nation. And innovation is really, I would say, a key component to that. And that's, not just about what we think about in tech and in AI. It's really getting down to problem solving, recognizing challenges that we may have, in housing, in ec dev, needing entrepreneurship. But within this ecosystem, there is the solution to unlock a lot of these challenges. So I would say a step is starting to map this out. Who of us is involved in government? Who of us is involved in business research? And let's start facilitating these relationships with each other. And that's where I really see, my role with Luminary coming in. Like Luminary is a connector, a convener, I would say a real big catalyst to spurring Indigenous innovation in Canada. And so, what do? We start to pull research closer to community, start to take the stigma out of the word research. This is something that's going to support us. Take the stigma out of the word innovation. This is something within reach of our Indigenous communities. But we need to start making space for our Indigenous communities within these innovation ecosystems. And so that's where I really see our deans playing a really strong role, our business schools, our faculties really coming in and recognizing we need to make these pathways for our Indigenous community members. Kelly, I've seen somewhere that you want to have 500 Indigenous business PhDs and DBAs in Canada. And I initially thought, that's a very lofty goal. But we as Indigenous communities need to start having these really lofty goals and it recognize it is possible as long as we come together. That would be huge systemic change. We need the business schools to come in and we have AI now. We don't necessarily need Math 12 as a prerequisite to get into the business school. The last time that I looked at a quadratic equation was in grade 12 math. It was the hardest class that I had ever taken in all of my years, even through the DBA. Math 12 was the hardest, the biggest barrier for me to really take off my career here as a business person. So, I would just like to leave this here and say that, innovation's not this abstract word out here. And I hope that everybody on this call can start to reflect to see what key piece that they play in advancing innovation in Canada.
Tasha? A squared plus B squared equals C squared? Is that the
Pythagoras theorem, I think. Yeah.
Listen,
Maybe.
problem solving. I mean, we need to actually you bring excitement to our communities when we look at it through problem solving, because what do we got? We got issues and challenges like everybody else around the world. And what I'm going to mean, the narrative about how we can be addressing issues and challenges that cover a range of areas from land use to product development to policy to training, all those topics you mentioned. And you said we need mapping. I'm going to get Terri Lynn just to for those of you that don't know, we just completed the first national survey of business schools in Canada, which is a mapping exercise. So Terri Lynn, I'm going to actually have you just put some shading on that. And then Keith, I'm going to come to you because you participated in that. And you can talk about where you're going in terms of the innovation agenda and training up that talent. And then Candice, I'm coming to you. So Terri Lynn, just give them an overview of the survey, please.
Sure. So Luminary launched the first ever Indigenous engagement survey across Canada with business schools to see where they're at in terms of their engagement with Indigenous communities, curriculum in their programs, pedagogy, if there's resources available specifically to support Indigenous student success in the institutions, and overall just to understand like what the landscape looks like. So we're looking to have that. We have the actual report. We're going to take it to the working group next week to just hear their feedback, and then we're going to release it in November. And we did a webinar on it last month. If you want to learn more, it's available on our website. I'll drop the link in when I'm done talking. But essentially what it's given us is a real insight in terms of like all of the opportunities that exist. Because it's being done in some places, I think there's a real opportunity for us to learn from best practices in terms of what's working and what isn't, and how we can really, use our collective strength to advance the needle and to change the experience that students are having in business schools as Indigenous people. Like I love when I hear about the grade 12 math because I'm an MBA student myself, and it's, I doubt I'll ever use it when I'm completing my taxes, but it's there and we have to go through it. So yeah, we're really proud of this survey. We're going to do it again next year. We had 48 institutions participate. And we're looking to increase those numbers. So if you didn't have a chance to participate this year, you will have an opportunity to do that next year.
Tremendous. So back to Tasha, the mapping, we need to know and have a benchmark. And what we've done is we now have a benchmark with this scan. And as Terri Lynn said, we're going to do this each year for the next 5 years. Just so you know, folks, there's about 160 business schools. There's about 66 university business schools, another 60 colleges that have business deans. So that's sort of the ecosystem there. And Keith, you participated, and you, again, back to the innovation agenda that's at our doorstep. I mean, you're facing that as a leader of a business school, all the deans in Canada, the presidents of university colleges and polytechnics. Your thoughts on where and how we advance the innovation agenda, especially with the talent market, the student market.
Well, thank you, Kelly, and Terri Lynn, Tasha, and George. Thank you for starting the conversation in such a superb way and allowing me the opportunity to participate here. I'm going to speak directly, if I may, Kelly, to a few folks I see here. I can't see everybody's names on my screen, but I see people like Daniel and David, who I know are fellow academics in this space. And I see two current deans, Michael and Travers. So I wanted to thank you, colleagues, for joining here. Folks, business schools, we are clearly placed in a pivotal position when it comes to the roles that we can play in terms of curriculum, connection, and community. We are the ones who deliver curriculum, but we have a responsibility to ensure that we are connecting with our communities in a good way. The notion of the innovation agenda and the benchmark survey that Terri Lynn described, to me, it's important for me as a business school dean. Whenever I visit an airport that I've never been in before, or I'm going to a shopping mall that I've never been in before, I look at a sign and there's 3 key words: you are here. To me, that centers me. The survey that Terri Lynn discussed to me is a way of letting me know as a dean, where am I? Where is the business school in terms of our connectivity with community, in terms of our engagement in curriculum, in terms of how we can learn best practices and good lessons from other business schools across Canada. So I would encourage the deans who are here and the faculty members to provide a forum by which your schools can connect with that survey, because it does give the notion of where we are right now. If we want to address the agenda and move it forward, we need to understand what's the current state. The notion that Kelly discussed in terms of innovation in a business school, it's phenomenal for us as a business school to be able to participate in this situation and this ecosystem. The one caution I would make is that I don't want me as a non-Indigenous dean at a business school to be seen in a situation where the business school we are working with an Indigenous community. To me, the notion of the value proposition, yes, we want to enable Indigenous communities, but there's also a tremendous value proposition for the school itself. To me, our learning and our curriculum is enhanced when we can engage appropriately with Indigenous communities. So to me, it's not this notion that it's always me as a non-Indigenous leader helping others. I get help as well, but be able to connect with these tremendous innovation examples. There's two instances I would point out that to me are really powerful for the innovation agenda. Number one is to develop a curriculum. And deans, if you can't do a curriculum, do a class. If you can't do a class, do a guest speaker. Do something where you can engage somebody from the community to connect with your students. To me, that will be a profound opportunity to start that innovation language and to progress you forward. The other item I would talk about is the ability to really celebrate entrepreneurship. And I'm glad that George brought that up. In our business school, through our student groups, we have sponsored Indigenous Youth Idea Challenges. We sponsored entrepreneurship competitions where our Indigenous participants, our Indigenous learners, our Indigenous business leaders, future business leaders, are building their own businesses today. To me, that's a way that if we think about innovation, to me, that the nucleus of innovation is started at the curriculum level in a business school. And deans and faculty members, if we can foster that, to me, we will create not just an opportunity to uplift an economic reconciliation, but our business schools will be the better for it. So those are the comments, Kelly, I wanted to address today in terms of looking at the engagement that we have and the role we play as a business school and business school leaders.
Keith, you've shone the light on engagement and how to do this. And I think this is what we mean by Indigenous informed, Indigenous led. We have to be doing this. And that's, as Tasha said, our role as a facilitator connector. We now know through the survey that there are 38 courses in Canada. Maybe there's more, but of the 48 schools that reported, we got 38 courses. And the discussions that we've been having is, and I just want to underscore what Keith was saying, is that it's not just courses, it's curriculum episodes, guest speakers. How could we infuse the knowledge and the excitement that's happening in the Indigenous economy, which is good for all students? And that could actually inform on different research questions that could come around everything from AI, carbon markets, tourism, et cetera, et cetera. So like you said, you have shone the light on the importance of pedagogy as a way to actually create world-class curriculum, as a way to prepare people to work in the Canadian economy and indeed the global economy. And what's really exciting, everyone's facing economic pressures. So you, Trevor, and others have agreed, we're brainstorming, how do we fast track curriculum development? How can we create more courses faster with economies of scale and transactions? So again, appreciate your leadership there, because we have, I see Milton Gray Eyes is on the call, Anita Cameron. There are Indigenous leaders like that. I'm just scanning to see who's on this webinar alone, that with the networks we have, we can be bringing Indigenous economy and business leaders and innovators into the ecosystem. A person that's done that is Candice Lauren. So I've known Candice since her days at MyTax. And she's now at Genome BC. And folks, when you think genome, you might think genetics, but you need to know that Genome Canada and Genome BC, that half the work is around agri-food. It's around food sovereignty, food security, innovation in food and food systems. So Candice, we've talked, and you came down to Phoenix in terms of lessons that we can learn from the work, especially in the area of the health field and so on, that we could extrapolate and fast track economic innovation. And so much of the work you do is really about growing healthy people, which is about a healthy workforce. Share some insights where you see innovation at the doorstep and things that we could learn and accelerate the Indigenous innovation agenda.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. I have to start echoing some of what Tasha said. It's the reality is there's an elephant in the room, And the word research still carries a lot of weight, right? So understanding that historically research has been done on Indigenous people, not for, with, by, and alongside Indigenous people, and being, you really have to be committed to changing that narrative to nothing about us without us. And that's the approach that we've taken at Genome BC, is understanding that this work is about empowering the communities themselves. So rather than pushing an academic agenda on communities, having an innovation and research pull model that empowers them to be pulling that talent in to help realize the community's research and innovation needs. And that's where true partnerships happen. I mean, this isn't just within the research and innovation and business ecosystem. The reality is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People was passed in November of 2019 here in British Columbia, right? We need to uphold UNDRIP within the work that we do, and a couple years later nationally with Bill C-15. And that's law. This is federal law now. And the reality that as a research funding organization, we're not doing it just because we have to, but because it's the right thing to do. And true partnership with communities, and taking a holistic approach, interdisciplinary approaches to realizing and solving these challenges is a must, right? It's the more voices we have around the table, the stronger the research is, the stronger the relationships become, and the stronger Canada as a whole is, because we have to work together. And reconciliation doesn't just benefit Indigenous people, it benefits all Canadians, right? It's just about being a good person and showing up and understanding that we all have a role to play in that work. Collaborative innovation projects between academia, community, industry partners, and researchers. It's a relationship like any relationship. And a good relationship starts with a strong foundation of transparency, mutual respect. Anything if you're going into a relationship, you need to give what you expect back. And that's what's really incredible, is most of the researchers I've worked with, they're not going into these partnerships with ill intent, but the challenge is because of those historical harms that have happened and the colonial harms in the name of research, there's a lot of weight that is there. And so many researchers now are having to, trudge through so many, hundreds of years of trauma to be able to build these relationships too. But when you get past that other side, it's certainly worth it. And meeting Indigenous people where they're at, because we are innovative. We've always been innovative. We had innovations pre-contact. We continue to be innovative. And the importance of legitimizing those Indigenous knowledge systems, right? And understanding that knowledge was already there. Tasha talked about pathways, meeting Indigenous people where they're at to be participants in these projects. If you're going into a community, you don't have to fly everybody in to do the research. There's opportunity to collaborate, bring youth in on a project, bring community members in. If you need to have that real understanding of what's happening in a community, who better to know that than the community members themselves, right? So it's not just about having a seat at the table, it's about centering Indigenous voices within those conversations as well.
So you both have underscored the research narrative. And look, an elder said to me, you mean you want to harness research, the same research that was done in residential schools, sleep deprivation experiments, food deprivation? And I said, yes, research isn't wrong. It's how it was done. So again, lesson learned, but I think underscoring that narrative and really showcasing the problem solving that it can bring. I want you to think about what Candice said about interdisciplinary approaches. So look, you can't do this in silos. Business schools need to connect with agriculture schools. We need to connect with law schools, engineering, medicine. In terms of looking at innovation, it does demand and require this interdisciplinary approach, which Indigenous people have been doing and practicing, as you point out, for thousands of years. We've been innovating from acetaminophen to medicines to, I have this PowerPoint with snowshoes, igloos, teepees, birch bark canoe, and all of these are examples of innovation. And really that's what we're harnessing today, is this innovation agenda. And Georgia and I have talked about sort of going beyond the romantic and cosmetic to focus on the emerging economic priorities for Canada, where Prime Minister Carney is going with economic priorities, the engagement, and where and how we have to have people at the table at the forefront of these discussions.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation, and I think maybe I'm a bit off tune here because I want to move it back to this issue about research. There is the person that we had in Arizona. His name is Manly Begay. He understood the Harvard project, and they did the research on this, which is solid. Which is you have to separate the politics of the community and the business interest of the DevCorp, that whatever they want to develop. That if you separated that out and actually had independent boards of directors running your economic development strategy, your probability of success was greater than if a First Nation community kept that sphere controlled inside the chief and council. And that's been around for 20 years. And, we've seen it. We were down in Phoenix. We saw the Pimas, and, we see it in the Navajos. They're doing the same thing. It is slowly taking off in Canada. I mean, if Milton Grice is on the call, he'll understand this because, previous to Muskeg Lake having an investment corp, it was all of those business decisions were put in the place of chief and council. And these are well-intended people. They're public servants. But did they really understand the full concept of, at this time in Muskeg Lake? I know the portfolio quite well. Did they understand how to run a golf course? Did they understand how to run a property management company? Did they understand how to understand a natural gas marketing board? And I would say, no, they didn't. It wasn't because of the fact that they didn't have the ability. It's just the fact that, this is what they inherited for their business development. We took that out of the hands using the Manly Begay research and said, you've got to actually have a separation of the politics of the community and the business development. You need, and the research bared out, because in the end, when you took a look at when we separated that out and put independent board members to the Muskeg Lake Investment Corp, that community developed corp took off, and there was more economic activity on the Packham Avenue, and I think they're casting out even further. You take a look at some of the other dev corps in Saskatchewan are quite successful. I look at Kitsaki. Kitsaki is not only investing in mining and resource, they've now moved into software testing because they've actually got people who are business oriented and understand where the businesses are going. That being said, now if I take my hat and put it on the other side with the publicly trading company, there is conflict because quite often, and one of my colleagues raised the UN Declaration. It's true. We actually, if you want to go down the line of discussing sovereignty, we do own the land and we do own the resources. Certainly in treaty territory, we say we never gave this up. But we also say that we have a responsibility, not only for today's generations, but the future generations, that we're not simply going to allow mining onto our industries, into our lands, and have tailing ponds or orphan oil wells spew whatever they want. We have a responsibility as Indigenous people to make sure that we're protecting the future for our children. However, when you talk about businesses, they don't talk about responsibility in an Indigenous way. They talk about an interest. We have a business interest to be in the north. We have a business interest to be in the south. We have a business interest to be in the mining industry, and that interest only comes to an end when shareholders say, we want out, or shareholders say, you're not returning our capital. The rate of capital return is not good for us. We're going to pull out. And so some of the research actually has to be focused in on how we bridge this issue of responsibility, which is Indigenous. And we also have to understand, to the Indigenous people, what is a business interest? How do you protect water? How do you protect the land and the air that we're inheritors of, and making sure that goes forward? I think that's probably the biggest thing in Canada. It's probably the biggest obstacle I see on both sides of the line, is trying to bridge that understanding of responsibility and interest. And with the court cases and with the UN, with the UNDRIP, You can't have a significant play inside of mining, forestry, fishing, as I said, the primary industries, without building into your business plan an understanding of what you need to do to ensure that you've got Indigenous participation or Indigenous engagement. The final point I would make, and this goes to the universities, and as you know, Kelly, I spent quite a bit of time hanging around the universities advising the University of Saskatchewan. And we were doing well. I can tell you this, in the 80s and 90s, the University of Saskatchewan was doing very well with Indigenous inclusion. However, when we took a look at the analytics, we recognized that probably 3 or 4 of our 15 colleges were actually doing anything. We needed a full university, full-on Indigenous engagement. We had 5 health sciences on campus. One of the 15 universities actually has that. And we started talking about how we can diversify our curriculum that allowed Indigenous input into whether kinesiology, medicine, nursing, engineering specific on this topic, and the B School. And once we started talking about that, and I think we kind of tackled it, we started getting diversity in all of our colleges. But one of the things we could never take away from is that universities have to ensure that the standards are set high, because in the end, that University of Saskatchewan degree has to be portable to wherever. If you're building bridges in Peru or building mines in Africa, that engineering degree has to stand up to the test of the marketplace. And so universities have to make sure that they build support for Indigenous students and their colleges to make sure that the baseline is good. And we talked about math and science. Baseline is good on science, base good is on research, base good is on, AI, understanding the AI issue, understanding what intellectual property is all about, so that they get into the workforce. And then the workforce will set their standards as to what they want to do, whether you want to be in a multinational corporation, if you want to be in a multinational corporation, it allows you to do something in Asia or whatever, or you want to be a local where you just want to build your small company and make enough money to raise a family in a very safe place, whether it's in Kelowna or whether it's in Saskatoon. The workforce will determine its standards. And then finally, of course, the whole professional designation. You can be an accountant or you can be in engineering. And, the profession that allows you to participate inside of their terms and conditions of being an engineer or an accountant or a specific person inside the investment community needs also to make sure that Indigenous supports are there. But it all begins with the university. The universities have to make sure that the standards are high, to make sure that Indigenous people, when they come out with their degrees, are able to participate in the workforce and are actually a part of a professional organization that's moving this innovation agenda forward.
George, I'm going to broaden universities to colleges and polytechnics as well, in terms of the whole ecosystem, because as we know that they're doing tremendous work. They are doing applied research. They've got student engagement, and you opened up the window on two-eyed seeing. How do we value both Western and traditional ways of knowing? Interest and responsibility. There's a great research topic. How do we balance? And we were in a boardroom one time, George, and an elder pounded the table. We want this mine to go ahead. We want mining development, but how are you going to protect my brothers and sisters, the fish, the plants, the animals? And the boardroom was silent.
Yeah.
So that really, I think, folks, if you could reflect on George's comment, I'll go to Tasha and then just go around on two-eyed seeing and how we can really embrace that to advance the innovation agenda. Give it a 1 to 2 minute comment each, starting with you, Tasha.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. We have to, I would even go maybe a little bit beyond two-eyed seeing, because I would like to privilege Indigenous knowledge systems while we are actively taking the best out of what we can harness from our Western systems. So I think moving forward, that's something that we have to do.
Yeah. It's not so much harnessing the Western. I think we can change the Western system. I'm not very happy with the capitalism that we have right now, where the biggest and the best will always win. I still believe that there is a bit of social capitalism that we can still have left in our system that allows us to. Why is it so expensive to buy a house? When did that become, why is it so expensive to, and so I think Indigenous people, Indigenous knowledge can somewhat shape a bit of the capitalism that we have out there. It's not so much making innovation also, Kelly, and I'll stop here. Innovation is not always about creating something new and different and great. Sometimes innovation just simply says, let's fix what we have. Let's fix the healthcare system. Let's fix the education system. It's there. We don't need to create something new. We just need to fix it.
Keith, your thoughts? We're going to change the whole economic system, capitalism, with a red
I'm not
face.
saying change at all, Kelly. I'm just simply
Quantify.
There's room for improvement.
Room for improvement. There, Keith.
Yeah, what we do at the business school is we speak the language of entrepreneurship and innovation. But we also couch it in the narrative of entrepreneurial thought and action. So entrepreneurial thought could be improving a situation. It could be demonstrating better outcomes. This notion of two-eyed seeing, Kelly, what I would say from a business school perspective is, yes, in a business school, there are core disciplines, accounting and finance, that have qualifying exams to be a professional human resources certified individual. There's obviously a curriculum that you need. What's beneficial for business schools now, and for those business schools that are considering accreditation, is the main global accreditation agency in its new revised standards specifically addresses societal impact. And it says business schools, yes, you need to demonstrate that your students can do income statements and do cash flow analyses and can have crucial conversations if they're an HR professional, but they need to be able to demonstrate how they are connected with and engaged with the community around them. What societal impact can they show? Because we're not meant to simply be a silo in a white ivory tower university. We are to be engaged with the community. I think that's where the business schools, again, it's the two avenues that are important for us. So we adhere to the disciplines, but we must connect to the communities around us to be accredited.
That's right.
Got to be relevant. Candice.
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, I think about Western knowledge systems and how it can be so linear, right? To bringing everything down to the smallest piece, researching, just such a small piece of things, but through an Indigenous perspective, we're much more holistic, right? It's not linear, it's cyclical. It's bringing in, one of the concepts I loved that Dr. Dara Kelly talks about is sphere intelligence, right? Transcending space and time, this idea of bringing in the 7 generations teachings, thinking about honoring the 7 generations past, the future 7 generations, and how our decisions today will impact those generations. But also, even thinking about bringing in that ancestral knowledge, tapping into the spirit world, if you will, and being able to harness that knowledge and be a conduit to bring the ancestors' voices back. So sphere intelligence is so all-encompassing and very different than what we see within these Western linear systems. And so I think it's very powerful. We have around the world people looking to Indigenous people for sustainability, right? We've been doing it. We understand it. We know the land. We, wayfinders too, right? They're reading the signs, everything around them. And there's a lot to learn from being able to look at these Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and definitely bring them into a Western construct of business. And it's definitely going to improve the way we do things. It'll help the environment. It'll help the people who are within those spaces and places, because something else is thinking about how we respect everyone, right? And organizational systems that respect every single individual, from the CEO to the custodians and the people who are keeping the lights on in the place. That's part of our teachings too. We sit in circle for a reason. Nobody is above or less than anyone else. And it makes me think of a story here in the Okanagan, and I won't tell the whole story. I know we have limited time, but it's about the story of how food was given. And Skimkees, the bear, he gives his life for the people to be, because these pitiful beings are coming. They have no hooves, nothing, no fur to keep them warm. And so all of the animal people are trying to figure out how are they going to take care of these pitiful beings, the humans. And finally, after, you know, days of deliberation, Skimkeese the bear lays his life down and says, I give my life, I give my flesh for their sustenance, my fur for their warmth, my bones for their tools, whatever they need. And Skimkeese gives their life, right? The greatest sacrifice that one could give. And they're all trying to bring Skimkeese back to life, all of the animals and all of the living things. And the fly comes along and wants to bring Skimkeese back to life. And they all laugh at the silly fly. What are you going to do? You're just annoying. What is even your purpose? And the fly sings a song and sings Skimkeese back to life. But the most unassuming person, or in this case, a fly, brings back Skimkeese. But when I think about organizational behavior or structures, it could be the most unassuming idea or individual within an organization that could be the key to unlock, right, that one's greatest potential or new innovations. And so through an Indigenous lens and thinking about two-eyed seeing, right, we see everybody in the room, including the fly, who may have the knowledge that we need to harness.
Great teaching, great story. You know, there is knowledge from those teachings that's being harnessed and actually channeled into real research projects. I mean, in the environment, ecology, there are now discovering why you cannot drain certain ponds and waterways. They're discovering if you bring, you know, certain mammals back into a habitat, it actually allows vegetation to grow. All these amazing things from people at NRCan and other scientists that are doing some work with our communities in the area of habitat. And if we don't figure out the habitat, how are you going to build structures in permafrost with climate change? So back to the interdisciplinary holistic approach that everything affects everything else. And you folks have been great. Terri, Lynn, I think the insights that we're getting here, I hope it's just fired up the neurons and the excitement amongst our friends here that have joined us and others that will be watching this. Before we go to discussion and Q&A, I'll get Terri, Lynn, but I'll just tell you an example. Bob Casius, he's at the First Nations University of Canada, a former president, a former dean of the business school, said, if we're going to get knowledge and mobilize and create commercialization from our knowledge, why should it only go to entrepreneurs and researchers? Why does some of it not go back to the community where the knowledge came from? So back to sort of reshaping even how we think about commercialization. I think that's opened up just an amazing area of discussion and ideation that we can build upon. So Terri, Lynn, let's get the Slido. You can introduce it, and then we'll go to some Q&A.
Perfect. All right. So before we get to the Q&A, we do have just two questions. Our great funders, SSF, actually require that we collect a little bit of data. So I will put the Slido up. You can scan the QR code and answer the question. Very straightforward. Did the presentation provide you with new knowledge? And then the next question that I'll flip to will be something on EDI. So while you're taking a moment to do that, I just wanted to add, like, it's been great listening to this panel. So thank you all for joining and sharing your knowledge. It really, I think all the pieces in the ecosystem and everything, it all makes sense. But I wanted to share that a couple of weeks ago, we attended the Atlantic Business Deans Conference in Antigonish, and the day before we got to spend a day with Indigenous scholars. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned, which I knew already, but just hearing it, I think really activated something in me. But because I worked with Corporate Canada on Truth and Reconciliation action plans, I've done, you know, a wind farm project in the territory. I know the importance of consultation and engagement partnership with Indigenous communities. I just wanted to echo to the business deans and the faculty that are here that, you know, there's good value in providing Indigenous content to the future business leaders that are going to be leading these big institutions in Canada, because when they get out there, they are going to need to deal with Indigenous people. So, you know, when we think about two-eye seeing, think about it in a Western context as well. And what do they have to learn in terms of how things are in the land in Canada? So just wanted to share that, and I will go to the next question, and we'll open up the floor for questions.
Somebody asked if there was a link instead of a QR scan. So Tasha,
Slido.com, and then you put in that number, that 1699512.
Okay. So let's close this and we can go to,
I'll just give it a minute because this one's a little long. So we
okay.
can, if there's
Oh my
questions
God.
in the chat or if anybody wants to start raising up their hands.
There's a question regarding the fact that I think it's Jalen indicated that, you know, this issue is not discussed in business schools. And I think in some ways, you know, this is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to raise the interest and understanding of what is happening inside of our communities. But there's a couple of things we've got to know about the marketplace right now. Number one, and I go back, Kelly, you and I go back to 1993 when we worked with Edward Bronfman, and his company eventually became Brookfield. When I took a look at the economy that we were going through after post-COVID, I kept saying to people, this feels like a 1993 recession. You know, those capital flight, all governments were way over their board in terms of debt. But I said the markets are acting very differently. The markets aren't moving away from Canada. They're actually still investing in Canada, but they're just sitting waiting for the right project. And what it is, Kelly, is the fact that the world is in a very high alert of conflict. North America still represents a safe place in which shareholders, whether they're in the Middle East, whether they're in Germany, or whether they're in Asia, want to invest into North America, specifically Canada, because we actually have what they want. The issue that we're facing right now, and as I said to you in a previous comment, that you cannot have major energy or forestry or mining without having an Indigenous component. And this is where I think a lot of businesses are grappling. Like they've been asleep at the wheel. They've had over 100 years to figure this thing out, and they haven't. And so they're now grappling with this engagement stuff. And this goes back to the type of entrepreneur that we need to create inside B schools. You actually have to start teaching the Indigenous rights, the Indigenous legal frameworks that are out there to make sure that when people go out there, whether they're Indigenous or not Indigenous, if they're going to work in Canada in major corporations or having their own little entrepreneurship shop, they actually have to understand what's happening in the Indigenous community. So Jalen, you're right on the target. It's a good question. And this is what we're trying to do, which is trying to show people that with the right research, we can show a roadmap as to how that happens. Can't guarantee we're going to have success. We're going to see something happening in the next number of months ahead of us in Canada. You can see the buildup. There's a debate right now about pipelines across BC. There's talk about railroads across Manitoba into northern Churchill, into Quebec, and pipelines down into the States. This will wake up a lot of people in terms of understanding our issues as Indigenous people and our responsibility of the lands and the airs and the waters that we consider to be ours as inheritors, or the business interests of a country. You're going to see that happening. And I think you're going to hear more and more from the Indigenous perspective as to how we deal with that. So good question, Jalen.
I think we've heard this across the country. And the beauty of the engagement scan is it gives us a starting point to change that over the next 3 years to really accelerate. And Tasha and Keith, you both teach. So do you, Candice. You teach.
I teach Indigenous business.
In the academic world. And look, we need to be more like the law schools. The law schools have been incorporating curriculum, Supreme Court cases, research. They're relevant to our communities. They've been doing this since 1972. We've produced over 5,000 lawyers to date, Indigenous lawyers. We've got PhDs at every law school. So in some ways, the law schools are a good example of where we're going over the next 10 years, to be more like them, walk down the hallway, talk to them, because it is holistic. You can't approach any of these projects without addressing land issues, legal issues, social issues, economic, political. It is holistic. And so there's the excitement and the opportunity is by bridging this innovation gap, we can actually, I think, attract more capital, as George pointed out. Keith, we can be a global leader. We do have partners in Australia, New Zealand, United States that are talking with us and are part of looking at innovation on the global scene when it comes to climate change, AI, Tasha's going down to Australia next week. Keith, you're on the international stage in Toronto at the AASCB, International Association of Business Deans, where we're putting, with Terri, Lynn, and I, and you, putting the Indigenous Innovation Agenda on the radar of deans around the world. So that's the future. And like you said, it's a fun journey because we're coming from a position of strength. And I liked what Tasha and Candice said about Indigenous knowledge and systems that we can build from. And I think folks, stay obviously focused on the innovation agenda. We're here to support you in any way we can. And I think we're going to create some pretty important impacts and transition over the next very short period, over the next two to 3 years. So then another question here. We'll do one more before we wrap up because I'm respectful of the time. What's business ethics?
I think Jaden's question really speaks to the ecosystem and the importance of the actors within this ecosystem. So Jaden, you play a very important role here. You are the currency of these institutions. So if you speak on this and bring this up to your deans, to your faculty members, that this is something that you want to be learning about, and this is not just an add-on, I would say anymore, this is strategy. Business schools need to be seeing this as this is going to be bringing value added to their students. And so there are some schools who are taking this approach and have MBA programs that integrate entire courses to Indigenous business. And so if your institution doesn't, maybe this is an opportunity for them to reflect that, hey, their students want this and they should be hiring Indigenous scholars to develop this sort of curriculum.
And if I could speak, thank you, Tash. If I could speak briefly here, we do have on the call one of our Indigenous scholars at our university who is delivering our very first Indigenous engagement, Indigenous business course at the MBA level, which for us is really profound. At the undergrad level, we've had a required course in Indigenous business for 5 years, but lately, as George alluded to earlier, we've pivoted it so that the course now deals for the first third of the course on rights, responsibilities, reconciliation frameworks. That's been profound for us. What we need as a business school, though, is to ensure that it's not a third or fourth year course that people basically take off as a check the box exercise. How can we infuse it earlier in the curriculum so our entering students can ensure that they are recognizing appropriately the world in which they will be future leaders?
Yeah, I think the other, if I may add on to perfect answers, everybody was fantastic. This stuff will happen organically, just by letting the most people know about these issues. I think you got some very good CEOs out there who understand this, and they will let their companies move in that direction. The tougher one, Jalen, trust me, the tougher sell is our own communities. Whether you're going to be an entrepreneur or whether you're going to be an institution, there is this issue of trust, and there is a significant amount of mistrust in Canada regarding Indigenous issues. There's a significant mistrust about our people and the public institutions that are out there, whether it's the justice system or the healthcare system. And you're in a generation right now, which I think probably has the greatest opportunity to overcome this mistrust. But you actually have to build trust even in your own community. Trust me. Even getting your MBA and getting into your own community and to start speaking a different language about investments, market, sustainable capital, you'll find that you're going to have to build that trust up within your own community because there is a lot of mistrust against corporations, and there's a lot of mistrust about institutions. Are you colonized? Are you urbanized? And that's a constant issue that I think your generation is going to have to always be a part of, trying to keep the middle ground moving. You're going to find people in your own community will not understand or will not appreciate the hard effort and work that you've got to get your MBA. And you know, it's
Yeah.
it's not it's not. I used to
Gotta
say
walk
that.
in
I
the
don't know if I
park,
can say it now.
yeah.
I used to wear arrow shirts because I had all the arrows in the back.
Mhm.
You know,
So
Kelly,
George,
you were there.
look, we're going to cut it there because you know what? It's true that, look, narrative, trust, community, and I don't blame people in communities that, you know, they should. We do owe a sense of responsibility to everybody to really underscore the important trajectory that you folks have helped shape today. It's been a tremendous dialogue. You've provided great insights. And like I said, let's, you know, Tasha, to use your metaphor with business language, the currency that people like Jaden bring, let's look at the ledger. You know, when we look at the balance sheet, let's not look at it through just the deficit side. Let's look at the appreciative side, what we can bring, what we can grow, what we can change. And you folks have really helped shine the light. Thank you so very much. Folks, for those of you that asked about the recording, give us time. It will be in our website at Luminary. And please mark September 22, 23, 24, 2026 for Montreal for the second annual Indigenous Innovation Summit. We're going to have more of these conversations to shine the light on innovation and showcase what you folks are doing. And that'll be with our friends and collaborators and partners, McGill University and the Desert-Toll Faculty of Management. Thanks so very much for joining us. Miigwech, Tapuina Naskomen.
Au revoir.
Namofas.
Have a good day, everyone.